All right. Apparently, I'm having a hard time with my microphone today. Here we go. Okay. Hi, everybody. So, I have a story to share with you today. This is a story about two countries that were at war. And it's not a modern story, so it doesn't have to hold it too tightly. We can sort of relax into the fact that they were, just a long time ago. And the two countries were worshipped two different symbols. One country was the people of the sun, and the other country was the people of the moon. And so, as you might imagine, they had some real angst against each other with the sun and the moon, being different things happening at different times. Some of us might say, they're just compatible in different ways, but that's okay. They were fighting. And so they were at war, and they gathered to have a huge battle. And fortunately, as was the tradition of many cultures back then, they would do this thing where instead of having a huge battle with everybody, they would sometimes nominate a champion to have a fight, right? So that we didn't have to have everybody dying. Which is good, it's better. We'd rather they not fight, but if you're going to fight, anyway. So the champions of the sun and the moon came forth on a glorious day. Right, the sun was high in the sky, which was great for the sun champion. He was very happy about that. And they fought. And they started first thing in the morning with the armies on inside each side intently watching. And the problem was they were so evenly matched that it was just almost impossible for one of them to gain an advantage over the other. But they kept at it all day long. They were fighting. It was just going after each other. And finally, when night fell and it was it was dark, they were so exhausted they just collapsed right where they were, still embraced in their struggle. And as they were laying there, the sun champion, the champion of the sun, said, "Why is it that you hate me so?" And the champion of the moon people said, "Well, last year when some of your folks raided one of our villages, you all killed my wife, and so I need to seek vengeance." And the champion of the sun said, "Oh, wow, okay." Thought about that for a little bit, and then paused and said, "Do you have kids?" And the champion of the moon said, "Yes, I have two kids who now do not have a mother." And the champion of the sun said, "Oh." And after another pause, while they were both laying there on the ground together, both exhausted, the champion of the sun said, "I have two kids too. How old are yours?" And so, over the course of the night, as they lay there recovering from their day-long battle, they talked, and they shared stories about their lives and what was important to them, and what was meaningful. And when they got up, when the sun started to rise again in the morning, they laid down their swords, and they laid down their shields, and they parted ways, unwilling, not unable, but unwilling to continue the fight. Because we cannot fight someone whose story we know. At least that is the moral of the story. And with that, that's the end of our story. And so, it is time now to sing our children out. All of us are together today, Amy tells us. Amy, in the Emerson room. So every child who is leaving now, please head on up to the Emerson room. Thank you. Bye, friends.
Our reading today is an excerpt from M. Scott Peck's book called The Different Drum, Community Making and Peace. He writes, On my lecture tours across the country, one constant I have found wherever I go, the Northeast, Southeast, Midwest, Southwest, West Coast, is the lack of and thirst for community. This lack and thirst is particularly heartbreaking in those places where one might expect to find real community, in churches. Speaking to my audiences, I often say, please don't ask me questions during break times. I need those times to get my thoughts together. And besides, it's inevitably been my experience that the questions you have represent concerns that others have as well, and that they are best addressed in the group as a whole. More often than not, someone will come up to me during the break with a question. When I say, I thought I requested you not to, the usual response is, yes, but Dr. Peck, this is terribly important to me, and I can't ask it in the group because of the members of my church who are here. I wish I could say this was the exception. There are, of course, exceptions and exceptional churches, but such a remark speaks of the normal level of trust and intimacy and vulnerability in our churches and other so-called communities. In our culture of rugged individualism, in which we generally feel that we dare not be honest about ourselves, even with the person in the pew next to us, we bandy about the word community. We apply it to almost any collection of individuals, a town, a church, a synagogue, a fraternal organization, regardless of how poorly those individuals communicate with each other. It is a false use of the word. If we are going to use the word meaningfully, we must restrict it to a group of individuals who have learned how to communicate honestly with each other, whose relationships go deeper than their masks of composure, and who have developed some significant commitment to know each other on a deep level.
I am just fighting with this microphone today. It's okay. Whew. All right. Human beings have been creating covenants or agreements about how to be in relationship together for thousands of years. You've probably heard of one or two of the more famous ones, at least, including the covenant between God and the Hebrew people. As of today, First Parish in Concord, already a deeply historical community, begins the process of joining a long list of covenanted communities as we officially launch our congregational covenant creation process. In case you're unfamiliar with the term, a covenant is an agreement by two or more parties. In our case, we're creating a covenant or an agreement about how we want to be together as a church community. There are more details to come on our process later in the service, so you'll hear about that. As we embark on this journey together, though, and work to figure out how we want to be together, I want to explore together first what kind of community we want to be. In our reading this morning, M. Scott Peck names true community as a place where we communicate honestly with each other, where relationships go deeper than our masks of composure, a place where we have a commitment to being real with one another. I like that aspiration, that definition of true community. The less appealing contrast to true community, as he suggests in his book, The Different Drum, is what Peck calls pseudo-community. Quote, "In pseudo-community, a group attempts to purchase true community cheaply by pretense. It's not an evil, conscious pretense of deliberate black lies. Rather, it is an unconscious, gentle process whereby people who want to be loving attempt to be so by telling little white lies, by withholding some of the truth about themselves and their feelings in order to avoid conflict. But it is still pretense," he says. "It is an inviting but illegitimate shortcut to nowhere." That does not sound pleasant to me. And I was really unexcited to read that Peck experiences most of the communities he comes across as living in this pseudo-community state. That's not what I want for my communities. That's not what I want for this community. I want us to be able to be real with each other, real and connected. The question then becomes, what does it take for a community to be real with each other? Peck has a whole process he suggests, which is brilliant, and I highly encourage you to read his book if you're interested. One last time, that's titled The Different Drum. But this morning I'm going to offer two of my own suggestions about what I think will help us, this community, continue our journey of moving from pseudo-community towards true community. And the first is vulnerability. The ability and willingness to be vulnerable with each other is essential to being able to be real with one another. And yet being vulnerable can be incredibly challenging. Shame and vulnerability researcher, author, and storyteller Brené Brown asked subjects she was interviewing to describe vulnerability, and here are some of their responses. "It's taking off the mask and hoping the real me isn't too disappointing. It's where courage and fear meet. Sweaty palms and a racing heart. Going out on a limb, a very, very high limb. Taking the first step toward what you fear the most. It feels so awkward and scary, but it makes me human and alive. Infinitely terrifying and achingly necessary." I like that last one in particular, infinitely terrifying and achingly necessary. That could sure sum up a lot of my personal experience with vulnerability. Scary as hell, and yet so critical if we're actually going to form deep bonds of connection with other people in the ways that we want to. One of my favorite Brené Brown quotes is, Vulnerability is the last thing I want you to see in me, but the first thing I look for in you. Vulnerability is the last thing I want you to see in me, but it's the first thing I look for in you. We're drawn to vulnerability. We label it authenticity, being real, being fully present. When someone shares their vulnerability in a healthy, grounded way, it's appealing. And yet so often, it's hard or even terrifying to go there ourselves. Now, to be clear, I am not encouraging you to just dive into deep vulnerability here at church at the drop of a hat without any guardrails. I am encouraging you and us to work on creating bonds of trust and to create spaces where it is safe to be vulnerable with one another. To do that, though, we have to do at least two things. We're just going to talk about two this morning, and both of those things are not always easy. The first is to be good listeners and be really present and compassionate in our responses to those who are sharing. We'll do a whole sermon about that another time. But the second thing is that we need to be able to talk about what's really going on for us when difficult situations arise. We have to be able to share when we're upset or frustrated with love. And we have to be able to receive people's experiences of frustration and upset with love and navigate it together. So in other words, we have to be able to be good at conflict. And guess what pseudo-communities are not good at? Yep, it's conflict. Peck writes, the essential dynamic of pseudo-community is conflict avoidance. Pseudo-community is conflict avoiding. True community is conflict resolving. Pseudo-community is conflict avoiding. True community is conflict resolving. What does it take to be a community that is conflict resolving instead of conflict avoiding? There are many things, many workshops, many articles, many books written about how to manage and navigate conflict. My second suggestion on the path to true community is thus one tool among many. It's a tool that is both simple and also powerful when faced with critique and conflict. It's curiosity. It is so easy if we are critiqued, it's so easy if we find ourselves engaged in conflict, to default to responding with frustration and defensiveness, or maybe anger and hostility. If we can choose instead to engage with critique and conflict with genuine curiosity from a grounded place, that choice has the potential to be transformative. It's a really hard choice to make, though. When someone critiques us, it's so easy, so normal to respond with defense. I was recently in a conversation with a family member who said, you know, in a card game 7 years ago, you didn't include me in the blah, 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 blah. Ugh, and wow, did I fail to respond with curiosity. First off, 7 years ago? You're still holding on to something that happened 7 years ago? And second, we did include you, and off we went, right, onto the races. Conflict 101. I responded to critique with defensiveness. I wonder now in retrospect, though, that what would have happened if I had managed to respond with curiosity, if I had been able to say instead, wow, you seem really upset. Can you tell me more about what happened that was upsetting to you? I imagine that the conversation would have been more productive than it was. It wasn't particularly productive, especially if I had managed to stay curious throughout and continue to respond from a place of truly wanting to know what it was that was upsetting this person I care about. It's easier, perhaps, to see the distinction in interactions we have with kids. So another example, a different family member, right? I walked in the door yesterday after running an errand, and one of our kids was sitting reading a book. I said hi as I walked by, and the response was, "You're the worst daddy in the world." Now, given that I'm fairly confident that that's not true, I was able to not get defensive, and instead I was able to respond with curiosity. So I just said, "Oh, why do you say that?" As it turned out, my great flaw was that I had contributed to the conception and subsequent birth of one of their siblings, who had hit them 10 minutes ago. So they weren't really mad at me, right? They were still mad at their sibling. And I was able to respond with care to the feelings they were having about that, because I had been curious. But I think it would have gone really different if I had been defensive, right? What if I had said, "What do you mean I'm the worst daddy ever? I do so much for you. I changed your diapers, I cook you food, I pick up after your toys. How dare you say that?" Right? That's a whole different interaction. And it seems almost a little maybe even silly, right, to consider saying that to a kid who says something like that, though that was said. But it's how we often respond to grown-ups, with defensiveness instead of curiosity. And curiosity serves us so much better. Monica Guzman wrote a book about how to navigate the polarization that exists in our country right now, titled "I Never Thought of It That Way." And one of the key strategies she suggests is engaging those who think differently than we do with curiosity. She writes, "If there's one question I want to persuade you to ask more often, it's, what am I missing?" What am I missing? It's a great question, a potentially door-opening question, a potentially transformative question. What am I missing? With my child telling me immediately upon entering the house that I was the worst daddy ever, clearly I was missing something. It's often less clear, though, in other situations of critiqued conflict or disagreement. More often, especially with adults, we tend to respond with defensiveness. What if instead, though, we were able to ask ourselves this question: what is it I'm missing? It's a great question in part because when we're considering the conversation not from a "what did I do wrong, why am I being attacked" perspective, but from a truly curious perspective. What am I missing? What is happening for this other person? What did they experience that I need to learn more about? When we can make that shift, it can be really powerful. I believe "what am I missing" is a question grounded in our values of care and compassion. If I care about this person with whom I'm in relationship, then I actually want to know why it is they're upset. It doesn't matter whether they're right or wrong. I mean, we'll get to that. It doesn't ultimately. But in the moment, the most important thing, right, is what's going on for them. Asking "what am I missing" shifts us out of the space of being made wrong and into a relational space of what is going on for the other person. And of course, this is the message from our wisdom story this moment too. You cannot fight someone when you know their story. When the other person again becomes human and real, when you remember how much you care for them, it's so much harder to fight. It can be equally hard to set aside our own fears and insecurities that often come up that cause us to act defensively. But if we can do that, if we can stay grounded in our goodness, we can, like the champions of the sun and the moon, set down our swords and shields. And instead of fighting, instead of being defensive, we can offer curiosity and caring and relationship. Now, I know there's often more to navigating conflict than just choosing a stance of curiosity. And I know that many conflicts are nuanced and complicated and don't have clear strategies to achieve resolution. But for many conflicts, if we can embrace a stance and attitude of curiosity, it can help us begin to travel down the path towards a solution. Because curiosity is a stance of interest in the other person's perspective and reality. When we defend, the other person is wrong and we are right. When we are curious, the whole dynamic changes because it's no longer about right or wrong. It's no longer about fighting. It's about relationship. Peck writes, "Just because it is a safe place does not mean community is a place without conflict. It is, however, a place where conflict can be resolved without physical or emotional bloodshed and with wisdom as well as grace. A community is a group that can fight gracefully." Choosing curiosity over defensiveness can help us be a community that navigates conflict with grace. Choosing curiosity over defensiveness can help us be a conflict-resolving community instead of a conflict-avoidant one. Coming back to the bigger picture, we all have several months of covenant creation work in front of us. As we navigate this work, I hope that we and you choose a how to be in community that is in line with the value of being a true community, not a pseudo-community. I hope you and we are willing to lean into both of these challenges of embracing vulnerability and practicing curiosity. Being real together can be messy sometimes. We like that veneer of politeness for a reason. I would rather, though, be real together, even if it's hard at times, rather than stay polite and disconnected. I hope you would too.
Turning we shall learn to lead in love.